This is the story of Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter who had two children, named Hansel and Gretel. When his first wife died, he remarried. The four of them lived in a simple cabin in the middle of the forest. Life was always hard at the woodcutter's house, but at that time things had gotten much worse. There was not enough food for everyone. So, the stepmother, who was very wicked, suggested they give a piece of bread to the children and abandon them in the forest. The woodcutter didn't want to hear about such a cruel plan, but the woman was very clever and persistent and managed to convince him. In the next room, the two children had heard everything, and Gretel burst into tears. "Don't cry, I have an idea," reassured her brother. Hansel waited until the parents were asleep and went out of the cabin to search for white stones that glowed in the moonlight. He hid them in his pocket and returned to bed. The next day, at dawn, the stepmother woke the children, saying, "Let's go chop wood in the forest. This bread is for you." The four of them set off. The woodcutter and the woman went ahead, the children behind. Every 10 steps, Hansel dropped a white stone on the ground without the parents noticing. While the father and the stepmother were chopping wood, the children were left alone, and there they were abandoned. Since Hansel had marked the path with the stones, the children managed to return home by nightfall. The father was happy to see them again, but the stepmother was not. She sent them to bed and locked the door of the room. Being wicked, she planned to take them even further the next day. The children heard the stepmother's plan again, but this time Hansel couldn't leave the room to pick up the stones because the door was locked. Gretel was desperate and could only cry. "Don't cry, I have an idea," reassured her brother. The next day, before they left, the children were given a piece of stale bread. Instead of eating it, Hansel scattered the breadcrumbs on the ground to mark the way. Once again, the woodcutter and the stepmother abandoned the children in the forest. So Hansel and Gretel began to follow the path marked with breadcrumbs. However, the birds had eaten all the breadcrumbs left along the way. So the children wandered until they came upon a house made of chocolate, cookies, and sweets. Hungry, they ran and started eating. Suddenly, an old lady appeared, inviting them. "Come in, there are many more sweets inside for you." The children ate a lot until they fell asleep. When they slept, the lady, who was actually a wicked witch, imprisoned Hansel in a cage and forced Gretel to cook for him every day. She wanted to devour him when he was fat enough. Every morning, the witch would say to Hansel, "Hansel, give me your finger, I want to feel if you fattened up." Hansel realized that the witch had poor eyesight, and instead of showing her his finger, he showed her a chicken bone. And she would get furious thinking he wasn't getting fat. Several days passed until the witch, tired of waiting, decided to eat Hansel. she said to Gretel. "Gretel, light the fire and put water to boil. Thin or fat, today I will eat your brother." Terrified, Gretel started to cry. Then the witch lit the oven and said to her, "Go in there and see if the temperature is right to bake bread." The witch intended to close the oven when Gretel was inside, to bake her and eat her too. But Gretel realized her intention and asked, "How do you get into the oven?" The witch replied, "You're a very silly girl. Look and learn." So the witch approached and put her head in the oven. At that moment, Gretel pushed her and she fell inside. The girl quickly locked the oven door and the witch burned to death. Gretel freed her brother Hansel, and the two hugged and cried with joy. With nothing to fear anymore, they explored the witch's house and found chests full of precious stones. They filled their pockets with all the treasures and sweets they could and set off into the forest. After walking for a long time, they began to recognize the path. They walked a little further and saw their father's cabin. The stepmother had died of hunger, and the father was tormented by remorse for having abandoned his children. Seeing them back, the father was overjoyed and hugged them. Then Hansel and Gretel showed him all the treasures and sweets they had in their pockets. And from that day on, the woodcutter and his children lived in abundance, without any worries. This is the story of Puss in Boots. Once upon a time, there was a miller who had 3 sons. When he passed away, the eldest son inherited the mill, the middle one got a donkey, and the youngest was left with only a cat. As the youngest son lamented his fate, he heard the cat say, "Don't worry, master." At that moment, the boy was startled. "It's all right," said the cat. "I'm here to serve you. If you follow my instructions, you'll have good luck." "If a cat can talk, I should listen to it," thought the boy. So the cat asked him for a sack and a pair of boots. The boy brought him a sack used for storing flour in the barn and a pair of boots from his late father. The cat put on the boots and took the sack to a field where hundreds of rabbits were hopping around. There, he captured one and brought it to the king's castle, saying it was a gift from the Marquis of Carabas. He had invented the name on the spot. The king was delighted and accepted the gift. In the following days, the cat continued to bring gifts to the king, from turkeys to fresh fish. When the king and his daughter were riding in a carriage, the cat saw his chance. "Master," said the cat to the boy, "if you do exactly as I say, I'll make you a rich man. All you need to do is take a bath in the river." Meanwhile, the cat visited all the farmers in the region and asked them to tell the king that the lands belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. As a thank you, he would reward them generously. The poor farmers readily agreed. As the carriage approached the river, the cat jumped onto the road and shouted, "Help! The Marquis of Carabas is drowning." The king recognized the cat and didn't hesitate to help. The cat told the king that bandits had stolen the Marquis's clothes. The king then ordered the finest clothes from his wardrobe to be brought. Wearing the king's clothes, the young boy looked very handsome, and the princess immediately found him very charming. The feeling was mutual. The king invited the supposed Marquis to enter the carriage. Along the way, the farmers informed the king that those beautiful lands belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. The cat walked ahead of the king's carriage and stopped at a castle. The castle was inhabited by a giant who also owned the lands worked by the farmers. The cat asked the giant, "Is it true that you can transform into any kind of animal?" The giant replied, "Of course." And to prove it, he transformed into a lion. The cat responded, "Wow, that's amazing. But since you're so big, surely you couldn't transform into a small animal." The giant felt challenged and transformed into a mouse. At that moment, the cat did what cats usually do with mice. Shortly after, the carriage arrived. "Welcome to the Marquis of Carabas's castle," said the cat, and prepared a grand feast. The king was very pleased, and asked the boy, "Would you like to marry my daughter?" The boy accepted. And they married and lived happily ever after. And the cat? Well, he had a luxurious life. This is the story of Alice in Wonderland. Once upon a time, there was a curious girl with a very fertile imagination named Alice. One day, while Alice was listening to her older sister tell a story in the garden, she saw a white rabbit running hurriedly. The rabbit was dressed in a waistcoat and clutching a pocket watch. Intrigued, Alice decided to follow him. The rabbit hopped into a rabbit hole, and without hesitation, Alice jumped in after him. The hole was so deep that the fall seemed endless. When Alice finally stopped falling, she landed in a hallway with many locked doors. There was a golden key on a table. She took the key and tried to open each door, but only a tiny door opened. However, Alice was too big to fit through it. Disappointed, she closed the door and placed the key back on the table. Then she noticed a bottle labeled "Drink Me" on the table. Without much thought, she took a sip. As soon as she drank it, she started shrinking until she was the size of a mouse. Now small enough to fit through the tiny door, Alice found that the door was locked and the key was on the table. Trying to reach the key, she accidentally knocked over a box of cookies labeled "Eat Me." She ate a cookie and began to grow uncontrollably until she hit her head on the ceiling. Now with the key but too large to fit through the door, Alice found a glove. Upon wearing it, she shrank and finally managed to pass through the door. On the other side, there was a garden. It was Wonderland, a place where peculiar creatures lived and madness reigned. Exploring Wonderland, Alice encountered the Cheshire Cat, a smiling cat who appeared and disappeared mysteriously. He gave her enigmatic advice while watching her with sparkling eyes. Following the cat's guidance, Alice found the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, perpetually stuck in a nonsensical tea party where teacups floated and time stood still. They informed her about the daily routine enforced by the Queen of Hearts. Determined to learn more about this feared queen, Alice pressed on. Along the way, she met the Blue Caterpillar, who smoked a hookah and spoke confusing riddles, sailed down a river of tears, grew and shrank several times, encountered playing cards painting roses, and witnessed the triumphant arrival of the Queen of Hearts. The Queen was feared by all for her explosive personality and obsession with playing croquet using flamingos as mallets and hedgehogs as balls. She ordered Alice's head to be cut off, but the king intervened and suggested they play a croquet game instead. Unable to cope with the bizarre instruments, Alice was accused of incompetence by the Queen. Subsequently, Alice was brought to trial to defend herself before the kingdom's inhabitants. She tried to speak but began growling uncontrollably. Upon opening her eyes, she realized she was back in the garden beside her sister, who offered her a cup of tea. Had Alice's journey in Wonderland been just a dream? Despite seeming like a crazy dream, Alice learned many valuable lessons. Returning to her normal life, she carried with her an adventurous spirit and an open mind to the unknown. This is the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, in a distant field there was a poor widow who had an only son, named Jack. One fateful day, the poor woman found herself without the resources to even purchase a piece of bread. Then she said to her son, "Son, I don't have any money left, not even to buy bread for us. All I have left is my old cow. Go to town and sell her." On the way, Jack met a mysterious man who offered him magical beans in exchange for the cow. Jack thought this was an unmissable offer and accepted the exchange. However, when he returned home with the beans, he provoked his mother's indignation by showing her the insignificance of the exchange. She was so disappointed that she threw the beans out the window. The next morning, however, Jack noticed that the grains had germinated, giving rise to a beanstalk that rose up to the clouds. Driven by his curiosity and desire for adventure, Jack climbed the beanstalk. Above the clouds, he discovered an unknown world, where a very evil giant lived. There, he followed a road until he reached a huge house, which looked like a castle. He entered discreetly and saw the evil giant ordering a chicken. "Lay an egg," said the giant. Immediately, the hen laid a golden egg. "Put another one," said the giant again. Each time the giant ordered, the hen laid an egg larger than the previous one, and Jack was amazed. After that, the giant sat down by the fireplace and fell asleep. As soon as he fell asleep, Jack grabbed the chicken and ran away with it. He ran along the road until he found the beanstalk, which he quickly climbed down. Jack told his mother about the adventure and showed her the chicken, to which he ordered several times, "Lay an egg." And she laid as many eggs as he wanted. Jack and his mother sold these eggs, and, in this way, they were able to support themselves and have a prosperous life. One day, Jack decided to make another visit to the giant, in order to bring more riches. So he climbed the beanstalk again and sneaked into the giant's house. There, he saw him counting gold coins. Unaware that he was being watched, the giant stored the coins in 2 bags, tied them tightly, and placed them next to his fireplace. Then he fell asleep. Then, Jack grabbed the 2 bags of coins. But they were so heavy that he ended up dropping one. At that moment, the giant woke up, saw that he was trying to steal the coins, and became angry. Jack dropped the other bag on the floor and ran away. He quickly descended the beanstalk, while the giant pursued him furiously. Then he cut the beanstalk and the giant fell dead below. And so, Jack defeated the evil giant and learned not to be greedy. This is the story of Robin Hood. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Robin Hood who lived in a small village surrounded by a lush forest. He was brave, intelligent, and possessed exceptional skill with a bow and arrow. Since childhood, he had dreamt of becoming a valiant hero, protecting the weak and fighting against injustice. However, the village faced dark times. Prince John, a greedy and tyrannical man, had imposed exorbitant taxes on the inhabitants. While the people grew poorer, the prince lived in luxury. Determined to change this reality, Robin decided to steal from the rich to give to the poor. To do this, he gathered a group of loyal and fearless friends, known as the Merry Men, and together they built secret hideouts in the forest and began their mission. During the day, Robin and his allies hid in the dense Sherwood forest, carefully observing Prince John's guards who patrolled the area. Whenever they witnessed injustices, they acted promptly to correct them. One sunny morning, while wandering through the forest, they heard a cry for help. Following the sound, they came across a humble peasant named Will, being intimidated by the prince's henchmen. They were about to confiscate Will's cart, filled with his harvest and belongings. Without hesitation, Robin and his companions advanced. With their precise arrows, they neutralized the henchmen and returned the cart to Will. Grateful beyond measure, he promised to assist Robin in future endeavors. In the days that followed, Robin and his companions continued to aid the needy in the village. They robbed the prince's tax collectors and distributed the wealth among the most impoverished. Thus, Robin Hood's fame quickly spread throughout the region, and people began to see him as a true hero. However, Prince John grew increasingly infuriated with Robin Hood. He knew that to maintain control over the village, he needed to eliminate this outlaw and his allies. Therefore, he sent his soldiers to capture them, but they always escaped, relying on their knowledge of the forest. One day, during a confrontation with Prince John, Robin revealed his true identity and proposed a daring challenge. He challenged the prince to a fair duel, the winner of which would decide the fate of the village. Arrogant and confident, Prince John accepted the challenge. At the time of the duel, all the villagers gathered to watch, including Prince John's soldiers and Robin Hood's loyal companions. The duel began, and Robin demonstrated his skill with the bow and arrow. With a single precise shot, Robin hit the target, but Prince John was unable to do the same. The crowd erupted in applause, celebrating Robin's victory and the end of the prince's oppression. From that day forward, the village thrived again. And Robin Hood remained in Sherwood Forest, assisting the needy and becoming a symbol of hope for all.